and start a stream so that you guys can follow along and pause and rewind. And give me a second to get this set up. What we're doing today is not authentication, but authorization. Right? Authorization. We're gonna set up some roles in our database and some permissions associated with those roles, and assign users roles, and then kind of lock down our routes and our express routes. It's kind of the task at hand. As I'm streaming, it wants me to authenticate with my, and let me share on, let me share, am I sharing my screen? Yep, sharing my screen. What's up, Henry?
You're recording this, right?
I am recording it, yes.
Okay.
Anytime I stream it, it's recording it. So two-factor, yes, give me a verification code to my cell phone. There's my two-factor as we get going. Okay. Looks like we are streaming. Let me get you guys a link. Stream URL copied to clipboard. Let me paste that in the Discord text channel. And can you guys hop on that and make sure that you can access the stream? I see Paul over there, thumbs up, right on. Cool. I do have a repo. Let me get you that repo, and I do believe it's caught up. So if I go to make sure I don't have any commits I haven't committed. Okay, there we go. So everything's pushed to my repo, and the URL is the same URL. If I paste that here, this is the public repo, just a little demo project called TailRunner that you should be able to pull down and access. If you want to code along, feel free to code along, starting by cloning this repo using whatever your software is of choice. It is in Discord. I'll paste it. So there's the share and there's the repo. I just put that again. Okay, so right now we do have authentication built into this. So we've got users, and those users are being saved in a Mongo database. And if I just open up Mongo Compass and take a quick look at what we're calling TailRunner, I've got users, orders, I got this audit log collection, pet owners. This is my backing database. And there we go. Looks like for whatever reason Henry is the only user I currently have. But we'll be adding users and adding roles and the like. Now this is going to kind of be in preparation of a lab, right? This code along is going to help you guys with a lab that we have numbered 0402. So if I kind of plop that lab open, the reason I'm opening this authorization lab is we did some pre-work yesterday where we have these different roles: developer, quality analyst, business analyst, all these kinds of roles, these groups, and then these different permissions, what the different groups can do. So we did this pre-work yesterday as a class, but more so because I wanted to look at the database schema and just kind of use that as a starting point. Where in our user collection, we're going to have an array of strings, and those strings are going to hold our roles. And then we're going to have another collection called role with a name and a permissions property that is a JSON list of permissions. And so what that individual role can do. And so this is the general schema for our database. Again, we talked about it yesterday. There's certainly more than one way that you could implement this. This is not the only solution. This happens to be a solution that I like because I view it as scalable, maintainable, and you put users in their roles, and then the roles have the permissions. Seems easy to add new users and modify nonetheless. So you got to start somewhere, and so I think for this we can just add the role collection and then start refactoring our users to have an array of roles. Even if it's only one, we can still put it in an array, even if a user only has one role. So probably I'll add a role collection and kind of start here. And maybe for this I can just have, make up the role, call it an admin role and a customer role, and we can kind of start there. So let's insert a document. And again, kind of referencing the underscore ID will be auto-generated for us. So the name, we'll just make our admin first. Sometimes, okay, so name of admin, permissions, and this is a sub-document, if you will, and these are all Booleans, and so what can an admin do? We'll say can edit users, true. Can edit, what else do we have? We've got some other users. We've got can edit, let's give them orders, true. Can insert, just looking at can insert, and this is very application specific, so I'm just kind of off of the cuff making this up. The important part is understanding the process and how this all works together. Can do whatever he or she wants, true. it doesn't matter, okay, but whatever permission they can do, you can give them that permission. Can edit users, let's just can edit orders, can delete orders. Is that a good idea? Probably not, but who cares? Can delete orders, and we had can view data, just can view data. Okay, so that's the general structure. That's what I want now. somewhere along the way, I introduced a mistake. Permissions. Oh, they're going to want these in quotes. Simply enough, put these in quotes. I think that's all that is. Yeah, okay. Put these in quotes. Doing an insert in Mongo Compass is very strict on making these strings, and that's totally fine. Okay. Missing my comma. Okay, so admin can do all the things. Specifically, you know, let's just say can delete orders. We'll kind of get to a point where we can test these things. Let's insert. Okay, so we have our role collection and we have one role. Let's just add a second role, which will just be customers. So we're gonna have admins and customers. And so your basic users and your admin user, real simple. Insert document, probably should have copied and pasted the name, customer, and permissions. All they can do is view data. And for whatever reason, that did that twice. Okay, admins and customers. I enabled live chat and there you guys are trolling me already. Way to go. Sorry?
Is there someone else in here that might be linked up to your database?
Oh yeah.
I'm not sure.
That's probably what it is. I believe other people are linked up to my database. Yeah. That's probably why we inserted had two customers being inserted. Maybe. Well, no, I don't know. They'd have my connection string. That makes sense. That's probably what happened. Someone else put a customer. Hey, now we know. Now we know. And that's fine. This is my dummy data. There's nothing sensitive in here, so I don't frankly care if you guys add customers or add roles. Okay, now what we have to do, as the UML demonstrates, is to have a role with a string array on our customer. Now, let me boot up Postman and kind of go to my routes for this. That was not something I needed to save, but I have TailRunner, and if I look at my register and log in. So these are my routes to add new users and log in users. And let me go back to my source code. And my new user schema, we do force an email and password. The question then becomes, do you enable on the front end, like do you enable a drop-down list for a user to select their role? No, probably not. How about what I'm going to do is when a user registers, let me zoom in so you can see that better. When a user registers, and we make sure they're not an existing user, and we hash their password, let's just do something like this. Let's just do user dot role. Is it role or roles?
Role.
role singular equals, and we're going to do an array customer. And so they're going to have a default role of customer. And then I would think an administrator later on could change that role. But when you register, we're just going to assume the role of customer when we register a new user. And that's just going to be the workflow for this. And so I have a role property, which is a string array. And again, the customer here has basically one permission, which is can view data. Okay? And therefore, if we register a new user, let me boot this up. Let me boot up my Express backend server. I've got a script, run start dev. Okay, so this is on localhost 2024. So localhost 2024, API users register. I've got an Evan at rankin.edu. And let me send that over. And it says user registered successfully. Let's check that. Back in our users, refresh. There we go. There's Evan at rankin.edu. And now I have a role array that is a string customer. So that looks like that's working. And now let's try and log in with Evan at rankin.edu. Login user, Evan at rankin.edu. And if I send that over, it says user logged in successfully. So we've kind of just refactored our users to have roles because they didn't have roles before. Henry, I'm sorry, but you're out of my database.
Okay.
You could probably recreate yourself if you so choose. Okay, so that's cool. Now what? So now, what we want to do is we want to get those permissions stored in our auth cookie. So we have an auth cookie. If I kind of go back here to what we already have, we've got a token and we've got a cookie, right? A JWT token, and that token is put inside of a cookie. And what we ultimately want to do is we want to put those permissions in the token or in the cookie. Kind of forget how we put it in the token. Yes, we put it in the token. Of course, and then the token's already in the cookie. So a couple of steps here, and it's not a ton of code, but let's start by doing this. Okay, I'm going to write a very simple database function that allows us to query the role collection and just pull out the name of the role. And so let's open up our database.js. Got a bunch of functions in here to do all sorts of operations. Now, I got mine called connect to database, so I'll say connect to database. And we are going to do a find one operation where the name is equal to the role name that's passed in. Okay, we're going to use this find role by name, because ultimately you could have many roles, right? And this is just going to allow us to query our database and pull back the roles that exist, right? To select these documents by their name instead of by their IDs or what have you. Yes, sir.
Sorry, would it be easier to like return the permissions of the role that we find?
Would it be easier to return the permissions? Maybe. Again, there's multiple ways you could do this. So walk with me through this process, and if you could think of a better, more efficient way, I'm all for it. But right now we're just getting the roles by name, and that's going to allow us to select the document by its name, right? It's just like get a user by their ID or get a user by their name. You know, we're just selecting a role document by its name. Okay, and then we're going to, of course, export that, find role by name. And so, yeah, could you just return their associated permissions? Maybe, but keep in mind, then we have to associate, at some point we have to loop over the user, find out what roles they have, and associate those permissions with that user. That's kind of the process that we're going through. Right, so back on the user.js, let's bring in that function that we just find role by name, and that's coming from the database module. Now, I don't know that this step is mandatory, but here's our token, and right now in our token we've got a user ID and a user email. Again, this is just information that's going to be kind of sent back and forth between the client and server, because HTTP is stateless. It kind of forgets who you are. So this is just information that you want to persist across multiple requests from the client is what we're putting into this token. And yeah, you might want that user email, you might want that user ID. Maybe you want the user's role as well. So I'm going to put the role here as the user.role array. So this will be that string array that we're putting into our auth token. And maybe we use that. I don't think that's necessarily critical, but that could be useful down the line. Okay, and so we send in the user, and now we're putting that role in that user's token, which is fine. So again, kind of going back, you know, the process is we got to look at the roles that the user has, and we have to look at the permissions associated with that role. Then we have to merge all of the associated permissions into that user's permissions. If they're in multiple roles, you have to merge them together. And so we have find role by name. So let's see, where's my... We have brought in this Merlin Express auth. Right, and so that loop that I'm talking about, where we're looping over to the roles array and merging permissions, there are some tools in here that basically will handle that loop for us, and we're going to explore that a little bit. And I don't know, maybe this is kind of simplifying it a little bit too much, but that's why we're going to look at the code. And if you wanted to do it a different way, we could. So let's bring in some methods from this express auth. Again, you can look at the documentation and see the different methods that are in there, or you could just look at node modules, at MERN, middleware, and you could actually kind of dive into the methods that are in here as well. But back on user, we're going to interact with that dependency a little bit. I'm going to import, let's do fetch roles from MERN Express auth. And so if I control click, I just want to show, hold down control, you can click on this method and you can see we're sending in a user. And if there's not a user or there's not an array of roles, we return an empty array, right? So if there's not a user or if there's not an array of roles on that user, we return an empty array. If the user is a string, if that's just a single role versus an array, obviously we have an array, and in that array you can see what's returned. We are looping over with a map function. Remember, a map function is inherently a loop. We are mapping this array, and where each role we are returning that role document from the database. Remember, fetch role is a role document out of the database. So we're basically getting all the role documents out of the database that are associated with that user's role. Okay, so if it's an array, map over the array and return each role document from the database. Yeah, that's a great question. So again, what you do is on your import statement, on any one of these, you can control click, and that will take you to the source code. So where did I find that? Is I just held down control, and I clicked on fetch roles, and that took me to his source code, or the source code of the package. Yeah, it is. It is. It's in there somewhere. Yeah, it's in there somewhere.
Where is fetch roles?
Where is fetch roles is kind of the same thing that we were just talking about. It's in the library somewhere, so shall we dig for it? Do you want to dig?
I did control and I went right through.
Oh, it's in lib.
It's in lib.
MERN.
There it is, lib fetch roles.
It's on middleware.
Okay. Now the thing that I do in my understanding is that it's always a good idea to look at the code behind it, but you never touch it. Okay, never modify anything in node modules. Never modify any of the source code that you're using. Okay, if you really want to modify it, you could, suggest a pull request or what have you on the repo.
You can also just like fork it and make your own version.
There you go. There you go.
So when I tried to modify mine, I'm guessing it didn't work because I didn't do that npm run build.
Did you try to modify yours?
And it said on control F.
Yeah. To be honest with you, I've never tried to modify. Yeah, I just, Okay, so there's a fetch roles method. We kind of now we get to use it, right? So issue auth token and issue auth cookie. So in the auth token, we're now putting the array of roles in there. And we're going to say const roles equals await fetch roles. We need to pass in the user. And a bunch of role documents. This is a little lambda expression. A role document passing in, oops, let me, this is, so passing into fetch roles, the user and the role document find role by name. Okay, so let's do this. Debug user. I'm just gonna see that we are in fact able to spit out the roles. And at this point, when we log in our user, that should trigger this function call and trigger that out. So if I go to log in my user, I send the request. I didn't think that was gonna work. So I'm missing, because I didn't recognize where my role is. So this argument right here that's being passed in, that doesn't make sense to me, yet I'm referencing some code that I've used before. Well, yours came back. Darn it. Yours came back, huh? Not if you're following my... See, isn't that the fun thing? When you're following my lead and yours works and mine doesn't. But it doesn't make sense to me, right? So this role argument, like we should have a role variable somewhere in here and I just don't see it. But I'm looking elsewhere on some prior code and I also don't see it. So I kind of looking at it, it didn't make sense, but let's do this. I mean, if I were to say or to just do user.role, of course. If I say user.role, and maybe that's what I need to do, user dot. So now, find role by name. If we send the array in here, log you in.
Take out role there. Yeah,
Take out that, you're suggesting? Okay, let's look at fetch roles again. Fetch roles takes in a user and a fetch role. Fetch role is a function to retrieve the role entities by name. Do I literally just send in the function fetch role? That doesn't make any sense. This is the one that we wrote. Yeah. All right, let me look somewhere else. Hang tight. I've done this before. I know what I'm doing, but I tend to make mistakes from time to time. Let's look somewhere else. Let me look at this one. was no help. Okay, let's think about this. Const roles, fetch roles. Let's look at the docs. Fetch roles. Fetch roles. Find user by ID. Role. DB. Find role by name. Role. Isn't that what I have? Fetch roles, user, role, arrow, find role by name, role.
Wait, does that user have a role on it?
Yeah, Evan does have a role that if I were to look here, Evan at rankin.edu,
Well, what role does he have?
he has the role of customer.
Okay.
Okay, so if I log in
Is
as
that an N?
Evan at rankin.edu and I log in,
Is an N, is it an N?
let me go back to my find role by name,
Discord window.
collection roles.
Role instead of roles. Or am I?
Yeah, I thought it was roll.
Yeah, I think it's just role.
Aha. Aha.
TailRunner with an upper R all over again.
Aha. Did you guys see that? I had an extra S.
Yeah.
See, the thing is, I'm having the same problem that you're having, and I did name my roles.
Are you trying to do the database maybe?
No,
Okay.
I'm not even using the same, like...
If
I'm
I
using the
log me in successfully, now I go back.
oh, project.
Here we go. There's my role document. So it was a problem with my find role by name. This is a really interesting function because again, it takes a user and it takes a fetch role function. So we're passing a function to a function, right? And so then you're able to loop over the user's role and actually call that function right here. So nonetheless, our roles are an array of objects being returned here properly, and we are getting our roles. Maybe just to test, let's add a role of admin to Evan. We got hi XD, roar XD. Who's the troll? Who's the troll? All right. Doge. All right, I should stop giving you attention. Moving on. Let's add another item of admin. So now my user has 2 roles. And if I log in my user, it should spit out the 2 roles here in my debug. Okay. Cool. Now what I want to do is also have a merge permission. So I've got two roles and those roles have different permissions. Well, thankfully there's a nice little function called merge permissions where we send in the user, we send in the roles. If there's a user and that user has permissions, you do one thing. If there's a roles and the roles has permission, here's our loop. We make a permissions array and return that permissions array. So merge permissions does kind of what it sounds like it is intended to do. We'll make a variable called permissions, const permissions equals merge permissions, pass in the user and the roles documents, the roles array that was returned from here. Now let's debug those permissions. And log in my user. Now, kind of going back to my it's not the greatest example because both users can view data. So let's, but you know, they will be merged. I mean, we log in the user, so let's log in the user. And again, all we're doing is spitting out the permissions, which are merged together. What can a customer do that an admin can't? Just to merge one additional, doesn't really make a lot of sense to ask that question, but just to demonstrate, can do thing to a you're gonna let me tab over to true. Okay, so now a customer can do thing and log in and can view data, can do thing is also true. Right, so you could see that between here we're getting the different roles associated with the user and we're merging all those permissions together.
How is it determining which roles to merge?
How is it determining which roles to merge? Is the first thing is we're retrieving those roles associated with the user, and we're creating on line 28. We're creating that array of roles on line 28.
Multiple roles assigned to that user.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I assume it's looking for duplicates and just showing it once or...
Yeah, that's all handled by merge permissions. So find all the roles associated with the user, merge those permissions together into one JSON object. And what I'm going to do is add that to my payload. So right here in my token, this first object is referred to as the payload. So I'm going to take that line down here and I'm going to add a payload of permissions. Permissions property is the permissions from line 30. So here's my payload, here's my secret, and then here's my options. And those are the three parts of a token that we covered last week. And now if I'm just going to debug my user and I'm going to spit out my token. And let me do that. And here's that token. And if I copy that, whoops, I didn't mean to hit Control C. I meant to copy. Regardless, we can copy that token. Well, Control C is copying. I guess it also terminates. There we go. So now let's go to jwt.io. jwt.io and paste that token in, and you can inspect. What do we have here? We have a user ID, we have that user's email, we have their role array, and we have the permissions object as far as what that user can do. Can view data, can do a thing, can edit user. And so we've added the roles and those permissions associated with those roles to the token. So that's cool. And that enables us to do some permissions checking on the routes. So let's do that. So here's my user. Back here's all my dog owners, right? So to get all pet owners, right now you got to be logged in to get all your pet owners. And so, you know, as I'm logged in, it makes this cookie. Here's my auth token cookie. Again, I therefore should be able to list all my dog owners, API pet owners. Oh, I closed it down. Let's start it back up. Okay, I should still have a cookie, so I should be able to do this. Okay. Cool, and if I clear that cookie, we kind of demonstrated this last week. Now I'm not logged in. Now I get an error, you are not logged in. Log in the user, creates the cookie. Now I can do the thing. But that's just checking if it's logged in, right? That's not dealing with the permissions. And so back on dog owner here, we imported is logged in. There's also has permission. And it's a middleware function, has permission, can do another thing. Let's put a comma there. Clearly our user doesn't have this permission, so let's kind of see the result. Right now I am logged in, but I don't have that individual permission. It says you do not have any of these permissions, can do another thing. Let's look at has permission. Has permission accepts either an object or an array of allowed permissions. But we're spreading it, right? So if it's a single thing, or it's an array of things, or it's an object, so it just depends on, it's like before, it's going to take different data types. If there's no rec.auth, there's an error. If the rec.auth doesn't have permissions, you don't have any permissions. So we did assign permissions, so we shouldn't get that error Otherwise, let's read the rec.auth permissions. And if they exist, loop over them and set auth permissions sub permission to true. Here's an error message. If you don't have the permissions, that's actually what we saw. Okay, so anyways, this has permission, but can view data was something we did have. And again, we kind of checked for rec.auth, which is actually what is logged in is doing for us.
Would it has permission make the is logged in redundant? Like for each function or route?
Would it make it redundant? Yeah, I think so, because has permission first checks for rec.auth. So it does seem a little redundant there.
So should we just remove it?
Yeah, let's check that, right? I think we can. I think we can just remove. But now, has the permission can view data? We should have that permission. I've demonstrated what happened when you don't have the permission, but now we're back to being able to view the data. Yeah, if I
think in your code, though, you're still checking for rec.auth.
I am, and yeah, I mentioned that. Yeah, I should. That's also redundant. That's a third redundancy.
Okay.
So if I clear that cookie and I go to hit this route again, it is giving me you are not logged in. The question is, can I remove this? And since has permission already checks for rec.auth, if I reboot, I still get the same you are not logged in. And if I log in as my user, he has can view data, user logged in, and go to hit that route. I have that permission, can view data. You can do another one, right? Has permission, can hula hoop. How do you spell hula hoop?
H-U-L-A.
I was going with the who. Hula hoop.
And will that check if it has one of said permissions or both?
Both, right? So now if I try and hit that route, and you don't have the permission can hula hoop. You do have the other one, right? So has permission can skip. Is skip bow a thing? You guys remember skip bow from the 90s?
Sure do.
I do that.
It's the thing that went around the ankle, right?
There's another. You're right. You're right. Yeah. So let's talk. Yeah. There's another way. So now, interestingly, it only hits the last one. I thought it would have. Now, point being,
Well, it's the first one.
can we pass it like this? Can
I just tried that. It just reads that first one and lets it through.
yeah, that doesn't work, huh? That doesn't
Well,
work.
try
That syntax does not work.
Try rearranging them and see if it just looks for one of them.
It depends on what the again. What is this expecting? It does look like it can expect some sort of object or array to destructure it, right? So maybe if we send in an array, this is good tinkering, but again, it all depends on how. Maybe we send in an array. Maybe. Maybe.
I think we do it like that. I think it's like looking for either or.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
Okay. Well, that's not exactly working either. So for sure, we know how to get it to work, and we can tinker around with other syntaxes, but nonetheless, can view data. So again, let's go back, and we've kind of seen a little bit of this package, and you know, this is really fine-grained. You can get really in the detail, down to individual permissions, what can or can't users do. We've definitely demonstrated how to install this and configure it. We've demonstrated is logged in. We've demonstrated has permission. Has role is kind of a layer up. Has role just checks for the roles associated. And at the end of the day here, has role, and that does take a different syntax. Has role takes admin or moderator. So it doesn't get down a layer beneath that. We just demonstrated, okay, well, roles have permissions, and we're checking on the permissions. So has role is a little bit less steps to do that. Oh, there it is. Has permission. It shows that. Has permission.
Yeah, I think that syntax means it just looks for either permission.
One or the other.
Yeah.
I thought they meant that if at least one of them is true, then it will return.
So let's just give one that's true. Can view data. I thought we did this. And what about can blah blah edit users? Okay, clearly we have this one. We don't have that one. We are logged in, and it's allowing that through. So that doesn't seem to be working the way we would expect. But we do know how to do this with multiple calls to the has permission can blah blah. Don't forget your commas. And now you're locked out. You know, when it comes to your final projects, I think this is one of the neater things that you can demonstrate, is having different users with different permissions. And as complex as our system is, you know, being able to demonstrate not only authentication but authorization, I think is a pretty good show of work. Now, there's also a little bit of code that we've depended on that you could extract that and kind of write your own logic there, and maybe take out some bits and pieces if you wanted to not depend on that express auth. I understand that. But you know, that's all part of the MERN stack and dependencies and relying on Express for a web server. You know, we've been doing that kind of stuff since day one. So I don't mind if it's a good dependency relying on it. Let me hit the lab and see what else we're missing. I think the has role or has any role, I think based on the code I've demonstrated, I think if you need to, you could use those. But this is really what's needed to kind of prep you for the lab. And that kind of gives you guys about 3 hours today to work on lab day tomorrow, lab day Thursday, hands-on tests the day after that. Cool. We got one random internet user who gave me a compliment. Thanks, random internet person.